I never figured I'd end up stocking shelves at a 24-hour Walmart in Millfield, Ohio at 28 years old. Not that I'd had some grand plan. Managing inventory at that furniture warehouse in Columbus wasn't exactly living the dream, but this felt different. Worse, maybe. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, that electrical buzz that gets into your teeth if you stand still too long. I was in aisle 7, home goods section, holding a box of picture frames and staring at the perfectly aligned row already on the shelf. Everything looked full. Untouched, actually. The warehouse job had been steady at least. Decent pay, benefits that almost covered a doctor's visit if you didn't mind the copay. I'd been there 4 years, worked my way up from floor associate to inventory manager. Had my own desk in the corner office, coffee maker I'd bought myself because the break room stuff tasted burnt. Then the owner's son-in-law made some investment decisions that turned the whole company into a bankruptcy filing overnight. Got the email on a Tuesday. Building's locked, don't come in. You'll receive information about final paychecks within 30 days. 30 days turned into 42, and by then my lease was up. Landlord wanted first, last, and deposit for renewal. Some new policy about month-to-month tenants being high risk. I had maybe $800 in checking and a maxed credit card I'd been pretending didn't exist. So I came home. Back to Millfield, population 6,000 and dropping every census. My mom had moved to Florida with her boyfriend 3 years back, but my buddy Travis said his landlord had a room for $300 a month, utilities included. The place smelled wrong and the heat didn't work right, but $300 was $300. I applied everywhere that first week. Gas stations, the feed store, substitute teacher positions that required certifications I didn't have. The Walmart was the only place that called back. Dorothy Gonzalez interviewed me in the break room on a Wednesday afternoon. She was maybe 45, hair pulled back tight enough to smooth the wrinkles from her forehead, gray eyes that didn't blink as often as they should have. Wore the manager outfit, button-up shirt, slacks, name badge clipped perfectly straight. Inventory experience, she said, reading my single-page resume. Not a question. 4 years, managed receiving, stock rotation, quarterly counts. Night shift, 10 p.m. to 7 a.m., stock, face, maintain floor standards. She set the paper down. Can you start Monday? I must have looked surprised because her mouth did something that might have been a smile. We need someone reliable, she said. Previous employee set a good standard. You seem capable of maintaining that. Yes, I can start Monday. She pulled a laminated card from her shirt pocket, slid it across the table. Protocols for overnight shift. Review these before your first day. The card was maybe 4 by 6 inches, printed text in that generic corporate font. 7 rules numbered with bullet points. I picked it up. The lamination was thick, professional, not the flimsy stuff you'd run through a machine in the back office. Someone had paid to make this permanent. These are specific to overnight? I asked. They're specific to this location. Dorothy's voice stayed level, that corporate pleasant tone that made every sentence sound rehearsed. The previous overnight stalker followed them exactly for 5 years, without any incidents. I expect the same compliance. I read through them quickly. Don't stock aisles 4, 9, and 13 between midnight and 2 a.m. Never enter the main stockroom between 3 and 5 a.m. Use the side storage area only. Only restock items where you can verify a customer removed merchandise from the shelf. That last one seemed weird. How was I supposed to verify what customers took? Some of these seem... I trailed off, watching her face. Unusual? She folded her hands on the table. We've developed these protocols over years of operation. They account for inventory accuracy, loss prevention, and employee safety. Dan, the previous overnight stalker, never had a problem following them. Right, sure. I set the card down. Is Dan still around? Could I ask him about... Dan transferred to a location in Arizona 6 weeks ago. better opportunities, management track position. Dorothy stood, interview clearly over. You'll do fine if you follow the protocols. Orientation is Monday at 9 p.m., then you'll start your first shift. Welcome to the team. She held out her hand. I shook it. Her palm was cold, dry, firm grip, no warmth at all. I took the laminated card with me, stuck it in my glove compartment, and tried not to think about it too much. A job was a job. $12.50 an hour wasn't great, but times 50 hours a week, they were giving me overtime right from the start. Meant I'd clear $400 weekly after taxes. Could pay rent, eat, maybe start saving again. The protocols were probably just corporate liability stuff. Don't stock certain aisles during specific times. Maybe they cleaned floors then or ran some kind of automated system. The stockroom thing could be about deliveries, semi-trucks backing in during those hours. And the verification rule was probably just their way of preventing overstocking, making sure we only filled gaps that actually needed filling. Made sense, mostly. I read through the card again Sunday night, sitting in my rented room with the space heater rattling in the corner. The other rules I hadn't focused on seemed equally specific. Don't use the customer bathrooms, employee restroom only. Don't respond to customers asking for help finding aisle 4, 9, or 13 between midnight and 2 a.m. Direct them to the service desk. If you hear knocking from inside the stockroom between 3 and 5 a.m., continue working and do not investigate. That one sat wrong in my chest. Who would be knocking from inside a stockroom? I showed up Monday at 8:45 p.m., card in my back pocket. Dorothy met me at the front entrance, handed me a vest and name tag, walked me through the basic orientation. Time clock location, break schedule, emergency exits. She moved through it quickly, efficiently, checking items off a clipboard. Questions? She asked when we'd circled back to the front. I pulled out the laminated card. About the protocols. The one about knocking from the stockroom. Don't investigate. Her voice stayed pleasant. Continue working. That's all. But why would... Dan followed these protocols for 5 years without incident, Dorothy said. No injuries, no complaints, excellent performance reviews. I'm confident you'll do the same. She walked away before I could push further, disappearing through the swinging doors into the back offices. 10 p.m. came fast. The evening shift cleared out, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead in the suddenly empty store. I stood in the main aisle with my scanner and a rolling cart, looking at the laminated card one more time. Just follow the rules, I thought. Do the job, cash the checks, figure out the rest later. I put the card back in my pocket and headed toward aisle 1. The first 3 weeks went exactly how Dorothy promised. Straightforward restocking, nothing weird, plenty of time to think. I'd show up at 10, clock in, grab my scanner and cart. The evening shift would filter out through the automatic doors, headlights sweeping across the parking lot as they escaped to their normal lives. Then just me and the fluorescent hum, and about 40,000 square feet of retail space that didn't need half the attention I gave it. Turned out the shelves stayed pretty full on their own. I'd walk the aisles with my scanner, checking inventory levels against what the system said we had. Most nights, I'd restock maybe 20-30 items total. Couple boxes of cereal in aisle 3. Some shampoo bottles in health and beauty. A dozen cans of soup someone had actually purchased. Real light work. I started bringing earbuds. Listened to podcasts about project management, career pivoting, resume optimization. Figured I'd use the downtime to plan my next move. Something better than $12.50 an hour in an empty Walmart at 3 in the morning. The protocols became automatic after the first week. Just part of the routine, no different than avoiding wet floor signs or checking expiration dates. Don't stock certain aisles during certain hours. Stay out of the main stockroom between 3 and 5. Use the employee bathroom. Simple enough. By week 3, I had my whole shift choreographed. Aisles 1 through 3 before midnight. Break at 12:15. Aisles 5, 6, 7, 8 from 12:30 to 2. Another sweep of the store, facing products, straightening end caps. Second break at 3:30. Light cleaning until 6, then final inventory check before the morning crew arrived at 7. Peaceful, really. Gave me space to think without anyone asking questions or needing anything from me. Then, Thursday of week 4 happened. I was working aisle 2, restocking pasta boxes when the sound started. That electronic beep from the self-checkout stations up front. The scanner sound they make when an item passes over the reader. Beep, 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 beep. Steady rhythm. Someone running a full cart through. Except it was 12:30 in the morning and I was alone in the store. I pulled out my earbuds. The beeping continued, methodical and consistent. Walked toward the front, pasta box still in my hand, and stopped at the end of aisle 2 where I could see the self-checkout area. All 6 stations were active. Screens lit up, displaying running totals. Items scrolling past on the monitors. Bread, milk, canned vegetables, frozen dinners. The scales registering weight. Bags rustling in their holders. Nothing on the platforms. No hands moving products. No customers standing at the screens. Just the scanners reading empty air and the computers logging purchases that weren't happening. I stood there maybe 30 seconds, watching the totals climb. $17, $23.50, $31.42. The machines processing transactions for products I couldn't see, items that the screen said existed but the cameras above the registers showed didn't. Then the overhead speakers crackled. Static first, that buzzing pop of a PA system activating, then voices, muffled, distant, but definitely voices. Multiple people talking at once, conversational tones, the kind of ambient noise you'd hear in a busy store during the day. 3 of those, I think. Did you find the aisle 9 has overlapping fragments, none of them in English. Or maybe they were, and I just couldn't process them right. The words had shape and rhythm like language, but they slid past my comprehension. Vowels that bent wrong. Consonants that clicked in places they shouldn't. The conversations continued. Casual shopping talk from customers who weren't there, discussing purchases in languages I didn't recognize and probably couldn't learn. My hand cramped around the pasta box. I set it on the nearest shelf, aisle 2, cereal, completely wrong location, and pulled the laminated card from my back pocket. Protocol 2. Never enter the main stockroom between 3 to 5 a.m. Use side storage only. That wasn't it. I flipped the card over, read through the others. Protocol 1. Do not stock aisles 4, 9, or 13 between midnight and 2 a.m. Not relevant. I was in aisle 2. The voices kept murmuring through the speakers, prices and quantities and product names I couldn't quite hear. Protocol 5. Do not help customers find aisles 4, 9, or 13 between midnight and 2 a.m. Direct them to the service desk. There were no customers. The self-checkout screens kept scrolling, totals climbing past $40 now, and the voices discussed their shopping in that sliding knot language while I stood there with a laminated card that didn't tell me what to do when the store started processing ghost transactions. I looked at Protocol 7. Do not investigate knocking sounds from inside the stockroom between 3-5 a.m. That one, I understood. Same logic applied here. Don't investigate. Don't engage. Keep working. I pocketed the card and headed back to aisle 2. Left the pasta box on the cereal shelf. Grabbed my card and scanner and moved toward aisle 5, away from the self-checkout area, away from the impossible voices. The beeping faded as I walked. The PA system crackled once more, then went silent. I started scanning items in aisle 5. Automotive supplies, oil filters, windshield fluid. My hands were shaking enough that I had to scan some items twice. Kept my eyes on the products, the shelf labels, the inventory numbers on my scanner screen. Past the end cap at aisle 7. Home goods, picture frames, decorative mirrors. Dark handprints marked the metal shelving. 5 fingers, clear as anything, smudged across the beige powder coating about chest height. Fresh ones, edges still distinct. Then another set, smaller, child-sized maybe, down near the bottom shelf. I kept walking. Didn't stop, didn't investigate. Moved to aisle 8 and started scanning dish soap, counting bottles, logging inventory levels that were definitely accurate because I'd checked them 2 days ago. My scanner battery died at 1:15. I headed to the back offices where we kept the charging station, walking the main aisle with my eyes forward. Past aisles 9, 10, 11. The handprints were on those shelving units too. Dozens of them scattered across the metal frames, all different sizes. Some looked pressed hard enough to leave moisture. I didn't touch them. Plugged my scanner into the charger and pulled up the security monitor while I waited. 12 camera feeds divided the screen into a grid. Produce section, pharmacy, electronics, main entrance, the usual views, all empty except aisle 4 showed movement. Dark shapes, human-sized, walking past the shelving. 3 of them moving together, one pushing a shopping cart. I switched to aisle 9. More figures there. 5, maybe 6, clustered near the center of the aisle. Standing still, facing each other. Having a conversation I couldn't hear anymore because the PA had gone quiet. Switched to aisle 13. Empty on the monitor. I left the scanner charging and walked toward aisle 4. Took me maybe 45 seconds to get there from the back offices. Turned down the aisle. Pet supplies, dog food, cat litter, bird seed on the far end. Nobody there. Shelves fully stocked. Products faced forward, everything exactly where it should be. Checked aisle 9. Canned goods, soup and vegetables and pasta sauce in neat rows. Empty. Back to the security monitor. The figures were still visible on the feeds, moving through aisles I'd just walked. Shopping, browsing, selecting products I couldn't see them holding. I unplugged my scanner. Battery showed 60%. Good enough. Headed back toward the sales floor and stopped at the main aisle intersection where I could see toward the front entrance. 3 shopping carts were rolling themselves across the tile, wheels squeaking in rhythm. No hands pushing them, no products inside them. Just empty metal frames moving in formation toward the stockroom doors. Their wheels making that familiar off-balance sound that needed WD-40. They rolled past aisle 1, past aisle 2, straight toward the swinging doors that led to the back. The doors opened, pushed by nothing, and the carts disappeared into the stockroom. The doors swung shut behind them, the pneumatic hinges hissing. I stood there with my scanner and watched the space where they'd been, listening to the fluorescent lights hum above me and the building settle around its empty aisles. I needed water. My throat felt like I'd swallowed dust, and my hands hadn't stopped shaking since watching those carts roll themselves through the stockroom doors. The break room sat past the back offices, down a hallway lined with motivational posters about teamwork and customer satisfaction that looked faded under the yellow emergency lighting. The door swung open under my palm. Standard break room setup, round tables with plastic chairs, vending machines against the far wall, microwave on the counter beside a coffee maker nobody had cleaned in weeks. The refrigerator hummed in the corner, except it wasn't humming. I stopped 3 steps into the room, one hand still on the door handle. The sound coming from the refrigerator was a voice, low and monotone, repeating numbers and letters in clusters. R473B. Discontinued March 2009. S218A. Discontinued November 2007. T944C. Discontinued. Dan's voice. I'd only heard it once during training videos Dorothy had shown me on my second shift. Safety protocols, proper lifting techniques. Dan standing in the same store, wearing the same blue vest I had on now, demonstrating how to break down cardboard with a box cutter. His voice had been pleasant. Midwestern accent, slightly nasal, patient tone when explaining each step. This was that same voice, coming from inside the refrigerator. R473B, discontinued March 2009. My fingers went numb around the door handle. The refrigerator was one of those commercial models, white with a glass front showing rows of energy drinks and pre-made sandwiches. The compressor hummed underneath the voice, providing a mechanical baseline to Dan's recitation. I should have left. Should have backed out of the break room and gone straight to aisle 1, far from the back offices and stockroom and whatever the hell was happening in this place. Instead, I walked toward the refrigerator, 5 steps across linoleum that needed replacing. Close enough to see condensation on the glass door, my reflection warped and pale. The voice continued without pause, cycling through inventory codes I didn't recognize. At the furniture warehouse, we'd used a different system, alphanumeric combinations that made sense, corresponded to actual product lines and manufacturers. These codes meant nothing to me, but they meant something to Dan. Enough that some part of him, some echo or recording or thing wearing his voice, was still reciting them at 1:47 in the morning inside a break room refrigerator. I pressed my palm against the glass, cold bit through my skin. The voice didn't change, didn't acknowledge my presence, just kept listing codes and discontinuation dates going back over a decade, products that had left Walmart's inventory before I'd even graduated high school. My hand left a print on the glass when I pulled away. I thought about the handprints I'd seen earlier on the shelving units, dark and wet, pressed hard enough to leave moisture. This print was just condensation, normal, the kind of mark anyone would leave touching a cold surface. I backed toward the door and Dan's voice followed me across the break room. M661A, discontinued April 2006. N337C, discontinued. The hallway felt warmer. I let the break room door swing shut behind me and stood there, breathing hard, listening to my pulse hammer in my ears. 2 a.m. hit while I was standing in the main aisle, scanner in one hand and the laminated protocol card in the other. I'd read it 6 times since leaving the break room. The words hadn't changed. Protocol 5, only use employee restroom. Do not use customer facilities. Protocol 6, between midnight and 2 a.m. Do not direct customers to aisles 4, 9, or 13. Direct all requests to service desk. Protocol 3. Never enter main stockroom between 3 to 5 a.m. Use side storage only. Nothing about refrigerators. Nothing about voices. I folded the card and slid it back into my pocket, then looked up at the fluorescent lights running the length of the main aisle. They flickered. Not all at once. The fixture closest to the entrance went first, tubes stuttering twice before steadying. Then the next fixture down. Then the third. A sequence. Deliberate. I watched the pattern move down the aisle, each light flickering in turn, creating a path that led straight toward the back of the store, toward the stockroom. My chest went tight. The lights continued their progression, fixture by fixture, drawing a line through the center of the store. I'd replaced fluorescent tubes at the warehouse. Knew they failed randomly, not in perfect sequence. New electrical problems caused brownouts or surges, not this controlled cascade. The pattern reached the halfway point, kept going. I should have moved, should have gone to aisle 1 or 2, stuck to the areas I'd already confirmed were safe. Relatively safe. As safe as anywhere got in this place. My feet stayed planted on the tile. The flickering reached the stockroom end of the main aisle. The last fixture stuttered 3 times, then went dark completely. The one before it followed, then the next. The darkness was coming back toward me. I moved then, turned and walked fast toward aisle 7. Scanner clutched against my chest. Behind me, the lights continued their reverse sequence, extinguishing one by one. I didn't look back. Didn't want to see how close the darkness was getting. The lights in aisle 7 stayed steady, bright and normal, humming their usual electrical song. I pressed my back against the end cap and waited. counted my breaths. Tried to remember if the protocol said anything about lights, about paths, about staying put or moving when things started acting wrong. Nothing. The card covered specific aisles, specific times, specific restrictions. It didn't cover this. After 2 minutes, I risked a glance around the end cap. The main aisle lights were back on, all of them. Steady fluorescent white running the full length of the store. I saw the footprints when I turned back to aisle 7. Wet prints on the polished floor, appearing right in front of me. One step, then another. Tracking across the tile in a straight line toward the pharmacy section. No feet visible. No body. Just the prints themselves, materializing as I watched. Mud. Dark brown, almost black, clumped and wet. The kind that came from deep soil, the kind that stuck to boots and required scraping. The smell hit me a second later. Old earth and something underneath it. Something that had been buried and shouldn't have been disturbed. Decay, but not food rot. Organic matter breaking down slowly in airless space. My stomach turned. I backed up against the shelving, putting distance between myself and the prints that kept appearing. They moved at walking pace, steady and purposeful. An adult stride, based on the spacing. Work boots, from the tread pattern. I'd smelled dirt before, plenty of times. My uncle had farmed soybeans outside Millfield, and I'd spent summers helping with equipment maintenance. Fresh-turned soil smelled clean, alive. This smelled wrong. Ancient and stale and corrupt. The footprints reached the intersection with aisle 8. They turned right. I waited until they disappeared around the corner before I moved. My scanner slipped in my grip. My palms were sweating despite the store's air conditioning. I wiped them on my jeans and headed the opposite direction, toward the front end. The prints hadn't made sound. No squishing, no wet slap of boots on tile. Just visual evidence of something walking through the store, tracking in mud from somewhere that didn't exist inside a sealed building. The sound started when I reached aisle 12. Dragging. Heavy and rhythmic, moving across the ceiling tiles directly above me. I froze mid-step, scanner halfway to the shelf, and listened to something massive pull itself overhead. The tiles shifted. Slight movements, barely visible. The metal grid supporting them creaked. I took one step sideways. The dragging sound adjusted, following. My throat closed. I managed another step, perpendicular to my original path. Above me, the sound changed direction, still dragging, still heavy enough to stress the ceiling grid. It was tracking me. I stood completely still. The dragging stopped. Silence pressed down from above, heavier than the sound had been. I counted 5 heartbeats, each one slamming against my ribs. Then I ran. Not toward the exit. I'd learned that much at least. Learned that leaving wasn't an option Dorothy would accept without consequences I couldn't afford. I ran toward aisle 15, the farthest point from wherever that thing was positioned. The dragging sound followed. Faster now, keeping pace. Tiles rattled in their framework. Dust sifted down, visible in the fluorescent light. I made it to aisle 15 and pressed myself against the shelving, chest heaving. The sound stopped above the intersection between 14 and 15. Waiting. I didn't move. Didn't breathe more than I absolutely had to. My shift had 4.5 hours left. Dawn was a foreign country I might never reach. The phone started ringing at 2:23. Customer service line, mounted on the wall near the service desk. Old-style landline with a coiled cord, the receiver shaking in its cradle with each ring. Sharp and electronic, cutting through the store's silence. I approached it slowly. The ringing didn't stop. 16 times. 17. 18. Protocol 5 said, use the employee restroom only. Protocol 6 covered directing customers during midnight to 2 a.m. Nothing about phones. I picked up the receiver on ring 24. Breathing. Not heavy or threatening, just steady respiration, in and out, slightly too fast to be resting rate. Human rhythm, human sound. I opened my mouth to speak, couldn't manage it. My vocal cords had locked. Underneath the breathing, I heard mechanical sounds, distant but distinct. Conveyor belts, maybe, or hydraulic systems, industrial equipment running in some space I couldn't see. The breathing continued without pause, and behind it those machines kept operating, purposeful and tireless. I held the phone away from my ear. The breathing continued, audible even at arm's length. I counted 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes. Finally, I hung up. The phone rang again immediately. I walked away. Let it ring. The sound followed me down 3 aisles before distance muted it enough that I could pretend it wasn't happening. 2:58 a.m. The stockroom's locked door sat at the end of the main corridor past the back offices. Heavy steel with a push bar on the sales floor side. Card reader mounted at shoulder height. I'd never tried accessing it. Dorothy had been clear during orientation. Main stockroom between 3 and 5 a.m. was off limits, side storage only. I stood 15 feet away, pretending to check inventory on my scanner. The scratching started at 2:59. Soft at first, fingernails on metal, or something similar. Rhythmic scraping that came from the other side of the door. Low, near the floor. Then higher up, multiple points of contact. Scratching in harmony, if that word could apply to a sound that made my skin crawl. I looked at my scanner. The time clicked over to 3 a.m. Protocol 3 was now active. Main stockroom off limits for the next 2 hours. The scratching intensified. Not frantic, deliberate, methodical. Like something working its way through a task it had performed many times before. I backed toward the sales floor. The scratching followed my movement somehow, concentrated on the section of door closest to where I stood. When I moved left, it shifted left. When I stepped right, it adjusted. My shoulders hit the swinging door that led to the main aisle. I pushed through and let it close behind me, cutting off my view of the stockroom entrance. The scratching didn't stop. I could hear it through the door, through the distance, through the walls themselves. Patient and persistent. I was in aisle 9 when I heard the voices. 3 a.m. had passed. The scratching had faded. I'd been restocking cleaning supplies, hands moving on autopilot while my brain tried to process everything that had happened since 10 p.m. The voices started as murmurs, indistinct conversation somewhere in the store. I pulled out my earbuds. I'd put them back in around 3:15, desperate for something normal, something human. The voices were coming from aisle 4. I moved closer, stopped at the end cap where I could hear clearly without being seen. Transferred to Phoenix in July, lasted 6 months before. Angela made it almost 8 weeks, best performance in years. The one before her, Marcus, he only managed 12 days. Male voices, 2 of them, maybe 3. Discussing people I'd never heard of. I'd asked Dorothy about Dan during my interview. She'd said he'd been here 5 years, said he'd transferred to Arizona 6 weeks ago for a management position. These voices were listing different names, different time frames. Dan was an anomaly. 5 years is unprecedented for overnight. Dorothy thinks this one might last. Wade says he follows protocols. My name. They were discussing me. Following protocols doesn't guarantee anything. You remember Christine. Christine stopped following them. That's why she didn't last. I pressed against the shelving. My scanner slipped from my grip, hit the floor with a plastic crack that echoed through the aisle. The voices stopped. I grabbed the scanner and moved. Didn't run. Running felt dangerous somehow, felt like it might trigger something worse than voices discussing employment records that didn't match what I'd been told. I walked quickly to aisle 14 and stood there breathing hard, waiting. The voices didn't resume. I found Dan's badge at 3:41, wedged behind a shelf in aisle 6. I'd been checking the shelf alignment. Busy work, something to keep my hands occupied and my mind away from voices and scratching and things that tracked my movements through ceiling tiles. My fingers brushed plastic where there shouldn't have been anything. I pulled it out. Standard Walmart employee badge, blue border with white background. Photo of a man in his 30s, brown hair, slight smile. Name printed below, Dan Black. Dark stains covered the bottom third, brown and rust-colored, crusted in the plastic's textured surface. The badge had been cleaned during the training videos. I'd seen it clipped to Dan's vest, bright and professional. These stains looked old, set, the kind that had been there long enough to become permanent. I turned the badge over in my hands and my fingers came away clean. At 3:30 a.m., I was supposed to take my second break. Had the timing written down on a post-it note in my vest pocket from week 1. 15 minutes in the break room, maybe some coffee, maybe just sitting with my head down trying not to think about Dan's badge still wedged in my back pocket next to the protocol card. Didn't make it to the break room. The self-checkout displays caught my attention from aisle 6. All 6 screens had gone bright white, washing out the usual blue interface with the Walmart logo and payment options. I stopped next to the end cap, motor oil and antifreeze, and watched the screens flicker once, twice, then settle into something new. Text appeared, black letters on white backgrounds, not the standard corporate font they used for product names and prices. This looked different, handwritten almost, informal. Welcome back, Wade. My name, right there on the first screen. Second screen showed more text scrolling upwards slowly, deliberately. We noticed you left early last time. Hope everything's okay. Third screen, fourth screen. All 6 displays cycling through messages meant for me. Just me. Nobody else in the building except whatever was writing these things. Dan mentioned the hours are flexible here. You can work as long as you'd like. I set my scanner down on the shelf between quart bottles of Pennzoil. My hands had started shaking again, same tremor from earlier when I'd heard the scratching at the stockroom door. The displays kept changing, new messages replacing old ones every few seconds. Night shift gets lonely sometimes. We understand. You're doing better than most. Dorothy will be pleased. I pulled out my phone. Didn't know what I was planning to do with it exactly. Take a picture, maybe. Document this. Prove to myself later that I wasn't losing it, that the screens really had shown my name and mentioned Dan and Dorothy. The camera app opened fine. I raised the phone, framed the nearest self-checkout display in the viewfinder. Through the screen, I could see the white background and black text clearly. Most people quit after the first week. You're stronger than that. I took 3 photos. Flash off. Didn't want the glare. Lowered the phone and checked the images. All 3 showed normal self-checkout screens. Blue interface, Walmart logo. Scan your first item to begin, in standard corporate font. I looked up at the actual displays. Still white, still showing messages. Dan lasted 5 years. That's the record. Think you can beat it? My throat had gone completely dry. I backed away from the self-checkout area, phone still in my hand, eyes on those 6 white screens. The messages kept cycling, welcoming me, encouraging me, talking about Dan's tenure and Dorothy's expectations and the flexible hours of night shift work. The displays went dark all at once, just black screens reflecting the overhead fluorescence. Then the standard blue interface returned. Scan your first item to begin, appearing on each station simultaneously. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds. Could have been longer. Time had gotten slippery around 2 a.m. and hadn't firmed back up. The stockroom door sat at the far end of the main aisle, maybe 60 feet from my position near the self-checkouts. Steel construction with the push bar and card reader, small window set in the upper half, reinforced glass, the kind with wire mesh embedded inside. Something moved behind that window. I saw it from the corner of my eye first. just a shift in the darkness visible through the glass. The stockroom didn't have motion sensor lights, like the sales floor. Emergency lighting only. Those dim fixtures mounted near the ceiling that barely put out enough illumination to meet fire code. I walked toward the door. Shouldn't have. Protocol 3 said main stockroom was off limits between 3 and 5 a.m. Still had 90 minutes before the restriction lifted. But something had moved behind that window. Got within 15 feet of the door, same distance I'd maintained at 2:58 when the scratching started, and stopped. The window showed a slice of the stockroom interior, metal shelving units loaded with overstock, cardboard boxes stacked on wooden pallets, industrial shelving that went up 12, maybe 15 feet, and Dan. He stood between two pallets about 20 feet back from the door, motionless, completely still in a way people don't usually manage, like someone had paused a video mid-frame. His face looked pale even in the dim emergency lighting, paler than in the training videos Dorothy had shown me, paler than any living person I'd seen. His eyes caught the light wrong, reflected it back at an angle that didn't match the source, like animal eyes in headlight beams, that flat shine that doesn't look human. He wore his Walmart vest, same as mine, same as the one in the training videos, but darker now, stained, mud or dirt, or something worse covering the front and sleeves. I raised my hand, started to wave, didn't complete the gesture. Dan didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there between those pallets with his pale face and reflecting eyes, watching the door, watching me through the reinforced glass. My phone was still in my hand. I looked down at the screen, pulled up Dorothy's contact information. She'd given me her cell number during orientation. Emergency use only, she'd said. This qualified. Had to qualify. Former employee supposedly transferred to Arizona 6 weeks ago, currently standing motionless in the off-limit stockroom at 4 a.m. I hit the call button. Phone showed 5 bars, full signal. Best reception I'd gotten all night in this building. The call screen appeared, Dorothy's name at the top, timer starting to count seconds. No ringing, no connection tone, just silence. I pulled the phone away from my ear and checked the display. Still showed 5 bars, still showed calling Dorothy Gonzalez with the timer running. 10 seconds, 15 seconds, 20. Ended the call. Tried again, same result. Full bars, call screen active, timer counting, complete silence. Tried calling Travis, same thing. Then tried 911. Every call showed perfect signal strength and active connection on the display while producing absolutely nothing in the speaker. No ringing, no busy signal, no error message, just dead air. I lowered the phone and looked back at the stockroom window. Dan was gone. Just empty space between the pallets now, emergency lighting casting the same dim glow across boxes and shelving units. I backed away from the door, made it to aisle 11 and stopped next to the cleaning supplies, leaning against the metal shelving and trying to control my breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Count to 4 each way. Technique my mom taught me when I was 13 and having panic attacks about starting high school. Checked my phone again. 4:47 a.m. 13 minutes until 5. 13 minutes until Protocol 3 lifted, and the main stockroom became accessible again. The protocol card came out of my back pocket easily. I'd been pulling it out and reading it so many times tonight that the lamination had started to feel warm from my body heat. Protocol 7. Do not investigate knocking sounds from inside main stockroom between 3 to 5 a.m. Nothing about what to do when the restriction ended. Nothing about whether entry was required or just permitted after 5. Dan's badge pressed against my leg through the denim, still wedged in my back pocket where I'd put it after finding it behind the shelf in aisle 6. Stained but clean to the touch, showing his photo and name and employee number. Dan, who'd supposedly transferred to Arizona 6 weeks ago. Dan, who I'd just seen standing in the stockroom with mud-covered vest and eyes that reflected light wrong. My phone showed 4:53. 7 minutes. I stayed in aisle 11, watching the main aisle and the stockroom door visible at the far end. The fluorescent lights hummed their constant tone. The building settled and creaked. Somewhere toward the front, one of the self-checkout displays beeped twice. 4:58. I walked back to the stockroom door, stopped right in front of it this time, close enough to touch the push bar. Through the window, I could see the same section of interior. Pallets, boxes, shelving units, emergency lighting. My phone showed 5 a.m. exactly. I put my hand on the push bar. The metal felt cold even through the building's climate control. Pressed down slowly, felt the mechanism release. The door swung inward. Wrong. Immediately wrong. The stockroom didn't look right. I'd been inside twice before. First night during orientation when Dorothy showed me the side storage area. Then again on my 4th shift to grab paper towels when the side storage had run out. Normal warehouse space, concrete floor, metal shelving, wooden pallets, boxes of overstock organized by department, maybe 40 feet deep, 30 feet wide. Back wall with the loading dock doors and the emergency exit clearly visible. Not anymore. The shelving units were still there, same metal frames and wooden pallets. But behind them, past the usual back wall, the space kept going. The concrete floor transitioned to packed earth about 15 feet in, and the walls shouldn't have been walls there at all, curved inward and upward in a way that looked organic. Carved. The surface had a rough texture that caught the emergency lighting wrong, showing reddish-brown clay mixed with exposed rock. Tunnels. 3 of them branching off from what used to be the back wall of the stockroom. Each opening maybe 6 feet high, 5 feet wide, sloping downward into darkness that the emergency lights couldn't penetrate. I stepped fully inside, letting the door swing shut behind me. The pneumatic hiss sounded too loud in the changed space. My footsteps echoed differently than they should have. Not the flat slap of shoes on concrete, but something deeper, more resonant. The air smelled wrong, too. Damp earth and old water. Mineral scent of deep rock. Decay underneath it all, organic and thick. Muddy footprints led from the door toward the leftmost tunnel. Boot treads. Same pattern as the prints I'd seen materializing on the sales floor earlier. They tracked across the concrete section, continued onto the packed earth, disappeared into the tunnel entrance. Dan's footprints. Had to be. I followed them. The tunnel swallowed the emergency lighting after maybe 10 feet. I pulled out my phone, turned on the flashlight. Weak beam, but better than nothing. The clay walls pressed in on both sides, close enough to touch if I extended my arms. Support beams had been installed at intervals, rough-cut timber wedged between floor and ceiling, old wood that looked like it had been down here for decades. The footprints continued deeper. I counted my steps, 20, 40, 60. The tunnel curved right, then left, then began a steeper descent. My shoes slipped on the clay a few times where moisture had made the surface slick. I put one hand against the wall for balance and it came away damp reddish-brown residue on my palm. At step 112, the tunnel opened into a chamber. Bigger space. My phone's flashlight couldn't reach the far walls. The ceiling rose higher here, maybe 12 feet up, rough rock instead of clay. More support beams crisscrossed overhead, creating a framework that looked structural and necessary. And badges, hundreds of them. They covered a natural shelf formation along the left wall, arranged in rows. Walmart employee badges, same style as mine and Dan's. Blue backgrounds, white text, photo IDs showing faces I didn't recognize. Names beneath the photos, employee numbers. Some of the badges looked new, lamination still glossy. Others had yellowed with age, corners curling, photos faded to ghost images. I moved closer, sweeping my phone's light across the collection. Jennifer Morrison, employee. Jetcher 847392, Robert Chin. Employee, Judgeshint 23847. Angela Reeves, employee Jarfwunsu 3928. Angela. The voices in aisle 4 had mentioned her. 8 weeks, they'd said. More badges below those. Marcus Thompson. 12 days, according to the voices. I kept scanning, found Dan's badge about halfway down the second row. Not the stained one in my back pocket. A different badge. Cleaner. Showing the same photo but without the dark discoloration. Personal items filled the spaces between badge groupings. Car keys on lanyards, wallets. Phones in various stages of obsolescence. Flip phones from the early 2000s, smartphones with cracked screens, one ancient Nokia brick that must have been from the 90s, watches, rings, a pair of glasses with one lens missing, coffee mugs with names written in Sharpie, all arranged carefully, deliberately, like a memorial or archive. I counted the badges I could see in my phone's limited light. Got to 47 before losing track. Moved further right and found more shelves, more badges, more personal belongings. Decades worth. Had to be. The oldest badges showed formatting and photo quality from 20, maybe 30 years ago. The muddy footprints led past the shelves to the back of the chamber where the floor dropped away into another tunnel entrance. This one descending even steeper into darkness. My phone couldn't penetrate. I stood there among the badges and belongings of people who'd supposedly transferred to other locations, other stores, better opportunities. People like Dan, who'd worked overnight shifts and followed protocols and then disappeared into job offers that didn't exist. My phone showed 5:17 a.m. Dan's voice came from behind me. Most people run sooner. I turned fast enough that my phone's light swept across the chamber walls, making the badge collection flash and disappear in sequence. Dan stood 15 feet away at the tunnel entrance I'd come through, hands in his vest pockets. Same pale skin I'd seen through the stockroom window. Same unnatural stillness. Up close, his eyes didn't reflect light anymore. They just looked tired. Deeply, impossibly tired. "You're not in Arizona," I said. "Never was." He moved his right hand from his pocket. 2 fingers were missing. Clean stumps where the ring and pinky should have been, healed over but wrong somehow. Too smooth. "Dorothy doesn't send people to other locations. That's not how this works." My phone felt slippery in my grip. I wanted to run back through the tunnel, but Dan was blocking the only exit I knew. "How what works?" He gestured at the chamber around us, at the badges and personal belongings arranged on their stone shelves. "Millfield sits on top of 17 miles of abandoned coal mines. Eastern Ohio Consolidated operated here from 1873 to 1954. Pulled 2 million tons of bituminous out of the ground before the seams ran dry and the company folded." I didn't say anything. My breath came shallow and quick. When they closed the mines, they left everything down here. Equipment, structures, spaces. Dan walked to the left wall where the badges were arranged and touched Jennifer Morrison's ID with his remaining fingers. "Nature abhors a vacuum. So does whatever exists in the spaces between things. The mines filled up with displaced entities, remnants, people-shaped things that used to be people or remember being people or want to be people. They don't have bodies anymore. Not really, but they remember having routines, jobs, purposes." He looked at me then. Direct eye contact for the first time. They miss the comfort of familiar work, the structure of schedules and tasks and someone telling them what to do. They're drawn to it, crave it. And Millfield's 24-hour Walmart sits right above the main shaft access, so every night they come up through the stockroom and pretend they're shopping. Pretend they're alive. My back was against the chamber wall now. I didn't remember moving. The self-checkout transactions. The carts. They're remembering being customers, reenacting their routines from when they had lives. Dan moved along the wall, past Angela Reeves's badge, past Marcus Thompson's. The protocols exist to maintain balance. The entities need a human presence, someone alive to supervise their performance. Someone to stock the shelves they pretend to shop from. They need the illusion maintained. Protocol 3. Protocol 7. The restrictions on certain aisles during specific hours. You're saying I'm babysitting ghosts. Not ghosts. Something different. Something that needs the structure more than ghosts do. He stopped at his own clean badge, the duplicate, and stood looking at it. The protocols give them boundaries, times and spaces where they can safely perform their retail memories without interference. Aisles 4, 9, and 13 between midnight and 2 a.m. The main stockroom between 3 and 5. You stay out of their designated spaces during their designated times, and they stay mostly harmless, mostly invisible. Mostly. My throat was still dry. I could taste clay dust. Dan nodded. Overnight stalkers who cooperate experience peaceful coexistence. You follow the protocols exactly. You maintain the supervision they need. You treat the situation as a job instead of a haunting. They leave you alone. You work your shifts, collect your paychecks, and everyone gets what they need. He held up his damaged hand. People who resist, who try to expose what's happening or refuse to participate or break the protocols repeatedly, they join the collection. He gestured at the wall of badges. Jennifer lasted 6 weeks before she started taking photos to post online. Robert tried blessing the store with holy water. Angela attempted an exorcism. Marcus called a paranormal investigation team on his 3rd day. I thought about the personalized messages on the self-checkout screens. Most people quit after the first week. They didn't transfer, I said. No. Dan's voice carried no emotion. Dorothy offers them transfers. Clean references, moving assistance, good recommendations. Some take it and leave and forget everything that happened here. The smart ones. The ones who realize this job isn't worth whatever they're being paid. And the others? Stay underground, permanently. Become part of the collection. Their badges on the wall, their belongings on the shelves, their routines absorbed into the collective memory of the entities who needed them to maintain the structure. He touched his badge again. 5 years I followed every protocol perfectly. Never questioned, never investigated, never broke a single rule. I thought that meant I understood the system. Something in his voice changed, became more human. But then Dorothy hired my replacement and I realized you can't warn people, can't explain what they're walking into. That's the unspoken rule. The one that's not on the laminated card. He looked at his missing fingers. I tried anyway. Left you a message in the stockroom on your first night. Wrote it in permanent marker on the wall behind the pallet of paper towels. Follow the protocols exactly. Don't ask questions. Take the transfer when she offers it. I remembered the scratching sounds I'd heard at 3 a.m., the intensity of it. They found the message before you did. Dragged me down here and took 3 fingers as punishment for violating the communication rule. 1 finger for each sentence I wrote. His hand trembled slightly. Then they sent me back upstairs to finish my last shift, made me clean my own blood off the stockroom floor and paint over the message. Dorothy processed my transfer paperwork the next morning and I disappeared into the mines that night. Been down here 6 weeks now, helping maintain the tunnels, organizing the collection, doing my job. Footsteps echoed from the deeper tunnel at the back of the chamber. Heavy boots on packed earth. More than 1 person. More than 2. Dan heard them too. They're coming. They know you're here. Shapes moved in the darkness beyond my phone's light range. Tall figures and short ones, adult-sized and child-sized, moving with purpose toward the chamber. Their whispered conversations overlapped into white noise, shopping lists and price comparisons and questions about aisle locations, all spoken in voices that sounded almost human but not quite. The first one emerged into my light, a woman-shaped thing in a faded Walmart vest, her face smooth and featureless where eyes and mouth should be. Behind her came others, a man in muddy work clothes, 2 children holding hands, an elderly figure pushing an invisible shopping cart, more crowding the tunnel entrance, all of them turning their attention toward me. Dan stepped between me and them. He hasn't decided yet. The woman thing tilted her head. When she spoke, her voice came from somewhere other than where her mouth should be. The overnight supervisor position requires commitment. I'm explaining his options, Dan said. Previous candidates required less explanation. Another figure moved forward, male-shaped, wearing a vest so old the Walmart logo had faded to gray. Dan provided excellent supervision, consistent, reliable. We miss his presence on the floor. You took his fingers, I said. He violated protocol. The woman thing again. Communication between overnight supervisors and their replacements creates confusion, undermines the structure. We require human supervision, but the humans must maintain professional boundaries. More shapes filled the chamber now, dozens of them, surrounding the badge collection, blocking the tunnel I'd entered through, all of them watching me with faces that didn't have eyes. Dan looked at me directly. You have a choice, Wade. Accept your role as overnight supervisor. Follow the protocols. Maintain the structure they need. Give them their retail memories and human oversight. You'll work your shifts, avoid the restricted areas during restricted times, and coexist peacefully with entities who just want to remember being alive. He gestured at the wall of badges. Or resist. Question. Try to expose or change or fix what's happening here. Join the collection permanently. Your badge on the wall. Your phone and keys on the shelf. Your routine absorbed into their collective memory. You'll maintain the structure either way, as supervisor or as permanent resident. The woman thing moved closer. Dan lasted 5 years. That's our record. We would welcome another long-term supervisor. We miss the consistency, the man thing said. The previous candidates lasted weeks, days, hours. A child thing's voice from the back. You've already completed 4 weeks. You follow protocols well. They were right. I'd followed every rule on the laminated card, avoided the restricted aisles during restricted times, stayed out of the main stockroom between 3 and 5, never investigated the knocking sounds. I'd been the perfect overnight supervisor because I'd been desperate enough to ignore every warning sign and rationalize every impossible thing. The entities moved closer, their whispered conversations building, discussing my performance, my compliance, my potential. Dan watched me with those tired eyes. Dorothy will offer you a transfer eventually. Take it. Walk away. Forget this place. And if I don't, then you'll last as long as you can maintain the protocols. He looked at his missing fingers again. But you'll never warn whoever comes after you. The woman thing reached toward me, her hand smooth and cold and not quite solid. Decide now, supervisor or resident. We begin tonight's stocking at 7 a.m. when the morning crew arrives. I ran, shoved past Dan and the woman thing and sprinted for the tunnel entrance I'd come through. The entities didn't chase me. They just watched with their eyeless faces as I crashed into the clay walls and scrambled up the steep incline. My phone light bounced wildly. I counted steps without meaning to. 50, 70, 90. Behind me, something massive moved through the chamber, footsteps that shook loose dirt from the tunnel ceiling. A voice that sounded like grinding stone said my name. I hit the main stockroom at a full run, burst through the space where the concrete floor met packed earth, kept going past the pallets and metal shelving. The door was 15 feet away. 10, 5. I slammed through it into the familiar fluorescent lighting of the back hallway and threw my full weight against the door to close it. Found the deadbolt I'd never noticed before and turned it. Pressed my back against the steel as something massive crashed into it from the other side, hard enough to rattle my teeth. The door held, and I stood there shaking while my phone battery died in my hand and left me in the flat, white light of the Walmart back hallway at 5:43 a.m. I was still pressed against the stockroom door, breathing hard enough to make my chest hurt, when I heard footsteps coming down the hallway from the front offices. Dorothy rounded the corner carrying 2 paper coffee cups, one in each hand. She wore the same corporate outfit she always did. Pressed slacks, button-up shirt, name badge perfectly aligned. Her gray eyes took in my position against the door, my vest half torn at the shoulder, mud streaked across my jeans. "Wade." She extended one of the cups toward me. "Thought you might need this." I didn't take it. My hands were still shaking too bad to trust holding anything. "I wanted to check on your progress." She set both cups on a supply cart pushed against the wall. "See how you're managing the overnight responsibilities." The deadbolt dug into my spine. Something scraped against the other side of the door, metal on metal, and I flinched forward. Dorothy didn't react. "There are tunnels." The words came out rough, my throat dry. "Under the stockroom. Coal mine tunnels with, there are hundreds of employee badges down there. Jennifer Morrison, Robert Chen, Marcus Thompson. Dan's badge is down there, Dorothy. Dan's in the tunnels." She picked up one of the coffee cups and took a measured sip. "You're experiencing what we call the 4th-week adjustment period." I saw him. Dan. He's missing fingers and Every overnight stalker goes through this around week 4. Dorothy's voice stayed level, professional, the same tone she'd used during my interview when explaining the protocols. The isolation, the altered sleep schedule, the lack of natural light exposure, it creates psychological stress that manifests as sensory distortions. Behind me, something heavy dragged across the floor on the other side of the door. The scraping grew louder, closer to the barrier between the stockroom and the hallway. I pushed away from the door. "You're hearing that, right? When I worked overnights at our Zanesville location, I was convinced the compactor was talking to me." Dorothy smoothed a wrinkle from her sleeve. "Week 4, almost to the day. I heard full conversations coming from the trash chute. Detailed discussions about inventory management and customer satisfaction metrics. The scraping intensified. Metal shrieked against concrete." Dorothy's expression didn't change. She lifted the second coffee cup from the cart and held it toward me again. "Your mind is trying to process the stress of your situation by creating elaborate narratives." She gestured with the cup. "It's a documented psychological response to financial desperation combined with social isolation." I took the coffee. My hands shook enough that liquid sloshed against the plastic lid. "You came back to Millfield with $800. Dorothy's gray eyes stayed fixed on my face. "Your checking account is currently overdrawn by $43 from the automatic payment you forgot to cancel for your Columbus Gym membership. Your credit card is maxed at $6,200. Your parents converted your childhood bedroom into a craft room 3 years ago. Your mother bought a quilting table that takes up most of the floor space." My fingers tightened on the cup. I hadn't told her any of that. "You applied to 17 positions before Walmart responded." She picked up her own coffee again. "Gas stations, feed stores, substitute teaching. The feed store manager told you they weren't hiring despite the help wanted sign because his nephew needed work. The school system has a 2-year waiting list for substitute positions. Sheets never called you back." The scraping from the stockroom stopped. The silence felt worse somehow. Millfield has 6,000 people and 1 major employer. Dorothy took another sip. "You can work here, Wade, or you can work at the Speedway for $9 an hour with 15 hours a week. Those are your options." I tried to swallow. My throat wouldn't cooperate. "The protocols exist to help you manage the psychological stress of overnight work." She set her cup down on the cart with precise care. Dan followed them exactly for 5 years. He never experienced the kind of distortions you're describing because he understood that the rules provide structure during vulnerable hours. Something massive shifted in the stockroom. The door rattled in its frame. Dorothy didn't blink. "You're not hearing that?" My voice came out thin. "I'm hearing an exhausted employee who's reached his breaking point." She checked her watch, the same efficient gesture I'd seen her make during my interview, which is exactly on schedule. Most people quit during week 4. They let the stress overwhelm them instead of trusting the structure we've provided. The scraping started again, slower this time, deliberate. Dorothy looked at me with something that might have been sympathy if her eyes weren't so flat. You can finish your shift, go home to your rented room with the faulty heat, sleep for 6 hours, and come back tonight to continue following the protocols. Or you can quit, lose your income, drain what's left in your account, and move into your parents' craft room while you wait for Speedway to maybe call you back. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. The choice is straightforward. She smoothed her sleeve again. This job pays 50 hours a week with overtime. That's $2,000 a month after taxes. Enough to cover your rent, your overdrawn account, and start paying down your credit card. Or you can have nothing. The scraping grew louder. Something dragged itself along the stockroom floor toward the door, heavy and patient. Dorothy showed no awareness of it. She looked at me the way she'd looked at me during the interview, assessing whether I'd be compliant enough to be useful. I reached for my vest pocket, thinking about my car keys, thinking about leaving, getting in my 2006 Civic, and driving anywhere else. My pocket was empty. I checked my jeans, both front pockets, both back pockets, the small coin pocket. I patted down my vest again, checked every pocket twice. My keys were gone. Morning shift arrives at 7. Dorothy glanced at her watch again. You have 73 minutes to finish your closing duties and prepare the floor. I suggest you focus on maintaining the standards we've established. She picked up her coffee cup and walked past me toward the swinging doors that led to the sales floor. Her footsteps were steady, unhurried. Behind me, something pressed against the stockroom door. Not crashing into it like before, just pressing, waiting. I stood in the hallway with the coffee cup in my shaking hands. My keys vanished. 73 minutes until the morning crew arrived, and Dorothy would expect me to have everything ready. The protocols were in my back pocket next to Dan's stained badge. The tunnels were below the stockroom with hundreds of other badges arranged on rock shelves. Dan had lasted 5 years before they took his fingers. I could follow the protocols and manage the entities who needed their retail memories, or I could resist and end up as badge number whatever came next, my belongings arranged between Jennifer Morrison's coffee mug and Marcus Thompson's wallet. The choice Dorothy described wasn't between working and quitting. It was between cooperation and collection.